So greetings, I'm Okko, neuroscientist and a geometrician, and it is my pleasure to guide you to the interesting world of sacred geometry. And today I will be arguing that geometry forms the structure of our reality on multiple levels, and how we can utilize this notion to change our lives and the lives of people around us. But as per good scientific practice, let's first go through financial disclosures. So if you encounter any product placements in the lecture, you know who to blame for the corruption. The following shenanigans have been funded in part by, whether they know it or not, by Perttu Häkkinen Foundation, University of Helsinki Drug Research Program, Eyeglasses, Suomen Kuivalehti, where I just recently published a series of articles on Chinese geopolitics, and Free Laughing Gas from Voikoski. And besides these, I serve in the executive board at Yhtiö Corporation as head of research and development. But onto the geometry, what and where it is. Basically, it's something that is all around us. Tattoos in Goa trance parties, fresh produce section at the local store, all these perfect forms around us in the nature. And living beings display exceptional amount of geometry. One of the most common ones that you can see in the nature is this golden ratio marked with symbol phi. Approximately the ratio of 1 to 1.6. It's a pleasant ratio to look at, one you cannot miss when you're looking around the nature. But geometry is also present beyond our sense of vision. For example, sound is vibration of the material, and this vibration is fundamentally geometric. So vibrating different frequencies or different musical notes on water droplets forms these beautiful mandala-like forms in the water droplets. And since the particle dynamics and particle vibration is geometric, it is no surprise that it is affecting the atoms and molecules that are formed. So here we can see a cross-section of a DNA strand, a recipe coding all life. And we can create identical, almost geometrical pattern by vibrating the water droplets shown earlier in the slides, making life not only geometry, but music. And there again, in the DNA cross-section, we can see the golden ratio be replicated. And so what kind of life does this geometric recipe then build? Of course, geometrical life. Starfish, one of the older so-called living fossils, is even on the first glimpse a very geometrical being. And it's a pentagram. And again there we can see the golden ratio. So if these primitive forms of nature are direct representations of geometry, did life, growing ever more complex, lose this pure mathematical nature? Well, of course it did not. Their systems to look the geometry from just became more difficult and complex. So for example, human body still holds immense amount of similar geometrical patterns, for example, in multiple aspects of the body, including the skull bone size. So as a neuroscientist, this became an interesting question whether this mathematical dance is also present inside the brain, in its neurons, and their function, and to what extent. So this was studied in an interesting study by Breslov et al., attempting to model the striatal connectivity using geometry. So what these guys found was essentially that even in striatum, which is a non-visual region of the brain, the neurons are functionally connected in these Euclidean geometrical patterns. So it is possible that the archetypal visual hallucinations produced by psychedelic drugs, for example, stem from the underlying orchestration of the neurons and are not the property of the pharmacological molecule per se. So this is where we get to the interesting part, actually. If the functional output of the brain is based on the geometry, even in non-visual regions, how we can use the geometry to alter the function of the brain. And how much of this brain function is determined by external geometry that we encounter in our lives. I was contacted exactly regarding this question through an email from Seppo Sidivainio last year. As a brief background of Sidi, in late 70s he got together with a few of his friends and they formed a band called Briard. Quite quickly they got to the studio and recorded Finland's first punk album, which was released in 1977. And here's the band in the studio, including Andy McCoy, Finnish music legend, and Sidi there in the center right. So then in their lives, some kind of different chess moves happened, and Sidi became the professor of developmental biology at the University of Oulu, Finland, and Andy McCoy became Andy McCoy. Here's Sidi in some weird CeeLo place wearing one of my designed mandala shirts. But on a lunch, we started to envision a project. So, as discussed during this lecture already, the internal and external geometry have connection to both the structural and functional aspects of the brain. So essentially the research project would be researching this trinity of psyche, world and geometry, essentially testing Carl Jung's ideas about collective subunconscious. So synchronicities, people experiencing around the world same patterns of knowledge and visual cues and coming to same conclusions and ideas. For example, Nobel Prize winners, these Nobel Prizes are on many years split towards many different recipients just because people invent the same things independently of each other's in multiple places around the world. Or like there's other these practical applications also if we would understand better the reactions that the geometry produces in the brain. For example, storage of nuclear waste needs to have some kind of universal symbols there, warning not to go there, something that would cross the species boundaries even and language barriers for definitely. So how we can preserve the place to be some kind of dangerous place for tens of thousands of years, we need some kind of universal geometry, some universal reaction from the brain. So of course we will then need to understand the reactions produced by geometry in the brain, not only in humans, but back in the evolutionary tree to other animals also. So we know some visual evoked potential research from the humans and symbols already. So we progressed to preclinical work, essentially a rodent version of this famous scene from Stanley Kubrick's Clockwork Orange. So the animals are shown different geometric forms and contrasts, after which the signal is amplified, recorded and analyzed on the computer. And with this fine-tuning process, we have reached what we consider the perfect form. But before I show you this perfect form, let's go through the theoretical background of the process already done. So, like the creation allegory, we start with the light or biological conception of life. We start with the one cell, and when we divide the cell, we start to immediately find sacred geometry. For example, the fish symbol of Christianity or DNA double helix there. And after continuing these divisions, we found more geometry and sacred ones, for example, Holy Trinity or Celtic knot symbols. And after continuing this division of cells or days of creation, basically creation allegory from the book of Genesis, we get to 7 days eventually, which is the symbol known as the seed of life. And from there, more divisions, and we form the flower of life, perhaps one of the most universally known symbols of sacred geometry. Essentially, all major religious symbols are found from this pattern. So, for example, the tree of life from Kabbala. But here also we found our perfect form. It is simple, essential, universal, cubistic, one might call. And with this in mind, we want to introduce you a perfection born from geometry, the shape of shapes, the form of forms. The perfection has a name. It is the product, only from Yhtiö Corporation. So, we at Yhtiö have been the market leaders in geometry since 2014, but we strive towards the perfection and we have continued the research and development of new products. We have enhanced our original product line and we have now bested the technical sector in the battle of attention of a modern consumer. We are continuing with this design heritage of exactly 6 surfaces, each 20 cm wide. The core of the product is made from foam PVC, which as a porous substance contains more surface area than a solid object, and thus we have made the product more materialistic for the needs of modern consumer. The connectivity of the product is exactly 0, but the compatibility is infinite. We supply the product in a package of 2, one to home and one on the go to your car, cottage or even workplace, wherever you need it. But most of all, what sets the product apart is its blackness. It's even something blacker than black. So we can assess the blackness of any object, using Fresnel's reflectance scale, or the amount of the light that they reflect on different wavelengths. So we have, for example, Granny Smith variety apple or asphalt. They are not very black, even though the asphalt dries a little bit. But when we get to the actual black materials, we have Stuart Semple's Black 3.0 or the legendary golden standard of blacks, the Vanta Black, which is often claimed to be the blackest material available. For the product, we went with the Japanese Koyo Orient Japan Muso black surface, which is even blacker than the legendary Vanta Black in this visible light spectrum. So essentially this means that the product absorbs over 99.6% of visible light. But using the same technology, we have made the product to absorb over 99.6% of the sense of a consumer. Sense is this untapped market potential that is superior to the secondary consumer data, such as browser usage or credit card usage collected by the tech giants currently. And by making use of sense, the product is enabled with fascinating features. So let me show you briefly how the product performs. We have the product here, and as you can see, it is rather black. As you can see, the product levitates. And levitation, when seeming mind-boggling, actually makes total sense. So let's take a consumer that is focusing their sight on the product. In the head of the consumer, there is some sense circling around. Let's mark it with the symbol J. Attention, along with the sense, are beamed towards the product. And in the surface of the product, these aligned nanotubes absorb the light and sense and polarize them along the plane of entry. And perfect analogy to this process will be that old TV commercial where they explained how paper towels work by them having small elephants inside it, and when you put it into the stain, the elephants soak their trunks into the stain and suck it up. And that's essentially how the product almost completely absorbs the sense of a consumer. And obviously, since sense and matter are synonyms, sense also follows the basic physical principles of matter. So we know that the sense is condensed in groups, So this accumulated polarized sense starts to weigh down the product. However, outside the product there exists the opposing force of nonsense, which opposes the weight of the product. So this gathered sense forms this geometric peak or common sense, in Finnish kaiken järjen huippu, on which we can simply balance the product, making it levitate. Very sensible, right? So consume, buy yourself a product you know you want to. It's actually already released. You can buy it almost anywhere, because even though the COVID pandemic struck really hard on small business owners and professionals in science, arts and culture, consuming is still not only permitted but encouraged by our society. So we still have discount store sneaker releases, shopping mall opening ceremonies, people actually queuing for the opportunity to consume first, and of course to get the free bucket along. And for this exact reason, even as funding of artists and scientists is more likely to be found under a literal rather than metaphorical rock, we at Yhtiö Corporation headquarters have had a pretty okay time. In Christmas we even made these small gingerbread factories for the small gingerbread men to work their gingerbread 9-to-5s, because profit never rests. And we have strived hard on the emerging market of growing Asian middle class. We actually opened the newest office in Indonesia. Let's see some video there.
Yhtiö. Hei Tuuti.
Se on taloudellinen.
Yhtiö.com.
They have even learned Finnish, truly the language of global trade. But in all seriousness, we are undergoing this historically unprecedented rise in economical and overall inequality in the world right now, and this trend has only been accelerated by COVID. So the money that 10 most rich people made only during this pandemic could eradicate the poverty completely from the world and fund everyone's COVID vaccine, and they'd still be better off than when the pandemic started. But it's, more fun to shoot the money literally to thin air. Billionaires have now joined these nation states in the exciting and ego-stroking hobby of space race. And it's not cheap stuff either. Do you know how many cultural events, lab tests, or vaccines or school lunches one of these rocket launches could fund? Quite many. One launch is worth 1/3 of the Finnish educational budget for the whole year, a dose of COVID vaccine for the whole Western Europe, and 0.2 Ed Sheeran stadium mega concerts or whatever the hell the consumers listen to nowadays. But this egos of these guys don't apparently and literally fit on the same planet. I mean, just look at the Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' rocket. If there's no element of phallic symbolism and toxic masculinity there, I don't even know. Just look at that fucking dick. And I'm even not speaking about the shape of the rocket. I really mean that greedy billionaire space tourist inside of the thing. But last into space is a rotten egg. And apparently what they're going up there is this, oblate spheroid. And they claim that in the reality it's even more visually pleasant than this animation. But I don't know. I don't believe it. I haven't seen it. The world's not either round or flat. It's this shitty pixelated GIF file, and big if true. But most of all, these guys have completely twisted geometries in mind. Now this lets the minds rest. But if there's geometry everywhere and we are exposed to the same geometrical patterns around us, yet some people see the world in total opposite light. So maybe in the end, geometry is merely a non-reflecting mirror, not to the universe, but to our individual brains and our individual values, showing to each of us what is sacred. That way, another person's sphere can be another's cube or a product. So I can only speak for myself, of course, but when I look into the levitating black void of this product, I can see my face melt into the alluring smile of Mother Earth, and faintly in my ears I can hear the calling whispers of the eternal, dark, empty void of the universe emanating from between the toes of Dionysus, and everything is one big resource ready to be capitalized by the corporation. So conclusions. There's no reality, there's only geometry. There is no need or necessity, there is only product. And there is no individual, only the corporation. Thank you.